Hydro, 67 cents. Nuclear, $1.59. If we took the money, 2/3 of the Highland project will be subsidized by your tax dollars. And that energy is going to end up going out of state, and it's not going to reduce carbon problems because we have to have backup power. But if we took that money and did what this gentleman said, invested in our local communities, our carpenters, our plumbers, the people that could weatherize and retrofit our homes and our businesses and our engines, we wouldn't even need this wind power. We would reduce our consumption significantly. So conservation really is the answer, and that's what we should be investing in, not more appetite, as Governor Baldacci likes to say, and I quote him here. Maine is prepared to host thousands of megawatts of generation capacity from wind to serve southern New England's insatiable appetite for energy. That was in 2007. And I asked the question, why must rural Maine mountains be sacrificed to serve their insatiable appetite? Well, indeed, conservation is where we should be going.
I made my living from electricity conservation for 5 years in the early 90s, and I'm a great believer in conservation. But conservation, like every other energy source, is finite. Once you've retrofitted the lights in this building, you can't go back and do it next year. It's a Band-Aid. It shortens, it alleviates the demand growth for a short period of time, but then we're back where we started in terms of demand growth. And as I mentioned, I think I think 2010 will be looked back on as a key year because we're going to be switching basically from oil to electricity. It's going to begin with the Nissan Leaf, and there's going to be the Chevy Volt, there's going to be geothermal electrical, and the demand for electricity is going to continue to grow. Conservation, absolutely. There's no silver bullet. My friend Lori LaChance says what we need to look for is silver buckshot, where there's a multiplicity of solutions. I don't argue that wind is a panacea or the whole solution. It cannot be more than about 20% of the energy source just because of the intermittent nature, but it can be a very important part of the energy source, and right now we're at 1 or 2%, so there's plenty of room to grow. And by the way, in terms of this backup, in the country of Denmark, which is about 20% wind power, they've made a deal with the country of Norway, which is 98% hydropower. When the wind blows in Denmark, power is shipped both to Denmark and to Norway. When the wind stops blowing, they open the gates on the hydropower in Norway and send clean renewable power to Denmark. In other words, you can use renewable resources. Also, these cars are, in a sense, storage devices. They're big batteries. So it is part of the solution, not the whole solution. And I have to say a thing about the blasting away of the mountains. Jonathan gave you the thing about 100,000 trucks. There will be. I brought this application for the Highland project. If you want to see what $2 million looks like on the hoof, I'll show it to you at this meeting. But nothing is going to be taken away from the Highland Mountains. There's a lot of road building to be done. When you build roads, you do what's called cut and fill, and you have to level them, and material will be moved from one place to the other. But the idea that we're sort of going to be blasting down the tops of these mountains, we don't want that mountain to be 1 inch shorter than it already is. And the foundation of these large turbines are actually very modest in size. It's a circle 24 feet around of concrete that's 5 feet deep, 24 feet around. If you do your old 6th grade math on that, it's less than 500 square feet. That's the foundation of a cabin in the woods. It's not a large structure. The mountaintops are not being destroyed. It is actually a fairly modest intrusion, and it's one that can be remediated if and when the technology is overtaken by some kid in Iowa who's going to figure out how to make electricity out of dirt.
Let's take another question back here.
I don't think any of the audience has thanked you all yet for being here. I'd like to thank you all for your time tonight. Energy is a very complicated issue. we should really think about that. It's very easy to get caught up in one philosophy or another. And I'd like to suggest that we truly emphasize the need to evaluate all energy projects, all renewable energy projects on a case-by-case basis. We are going to need all of the renewable power and conservation energy efficiency that we have to offset all of the coal and nuclear, all of the fossil fuels that are being burned today. It's huge. Climate change is a drastic problem. My question, I have two questions, probably for Peter Kent. There's a bill in the legislature, and I'm not sure if it's passed yet, and I don't know the number, maybe you can clarify, that talks about tangible benefits for communities, laying down a framework for sort of what would be an acceptable minimal to bargain from for communities. And we can call it a bribe, but we're also asking for benefits. So we have to think about that. The question is, there are a lot of problems arising with land-based wind, as we're hearing tonight. With offshore wind, is there the capacity to fulfill out in the Gulf of Maine all of the state's energy needs, wind energy needs? And I've heard that there's more energy out there than we've bargained for, and I'm not sure what the numbers are.
So Peter, can you answer that? Peter Kent?
There are 3,000 bills in the legislature, and the only one I can think of that you might be referring to has to do with submerged lands. It's interesting that the Bureau of Lands and Parks has control over all Maine land that's underwater. And came to that, interestingly, this bill, it's a piece of the larger bill, 1810, but it came through the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee because we deal with the Bureau of Lands and Parks. It was quickly shunted over to the Transportation and Utilities because they were dealing with the wind energy piece. But Maine Bureau of Lands and Parks can set costs for offshore wind and renting, leasing that submerged land to companies that are coming into the state, if they're out of state, if they're in state as well. So perhaps that answers your question. I don't know if anyone that knows about another bill.
Not directly to the question of the number of the bill, but I can tell you that Neptune Wind has its eye on a piece of property in the water. I think it's near Metinick Island, 40 turbines. Neptune Wind is also going to run, if they get it, a cable from Maine straight to Boston.
Peter Woodruff, you want to comment on any of this?
Well, the first time I heard about this project was Joanne's letter in the paper. So, but that is not offshore wind. That is inshore wind, and it will face similar problems as Cape Wind is down in the Cape. So that's an inshore project.
Let's take another.
I just want to pick up and comment on something that the last woman said briefly up front, and that's that I don't think anyone disagrees here that wind power is a piece of the puzzle. I don't think we're promoting wind power as the only answer. I have two constituents in my district who power their houses with photovoltaic panels and solar panels. I mean, that's a piece of the answer too. So there are many answers to